Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound Radio Show, your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. I'm Robert Winfrey. I'm your host for this show most weeks. Tonight, we have a review of the worst event of the year. Off the top of my head, and I know there might be some recency bias, but I genuinely think UFC Fight Night 134 is the worst event this year, and I will probably wind up defending that position at some point later on. I genuinely hope that I do not have to deal with a worse card than this one. Ugh. But we also get to preview UFC on Fox 30, which might be the second to last UFC on Fox show, or the actual last one, depending on how the specifics shake out. Which is a great card on paper. Let's all hope this thing holds together, because great main event, great co-main event, great featured bout. Like, it's all good. Just hold together, please. And then, of course, I don't think there's been too much major news, actually. We'll talk a little bit about some stuff that kind of broke pertaining to Alexander Gustafsson, but if you didn't see this coming, you just weren't paying attention. But, again, relatively quiet on the news front, all things considered. So we'll touch on, again, some of the major points, but other than that, should be a relatively straightforward show. We do not have Jeff with us this evening. Jeff is busy at San Diego Comic-Con. Hope he has a fruitful and enjoyable experience. I'm just, if you don't mind me nerding out about something other than MMA, they announced Invader Zim is returning, and I am so happy. I have a deep affection for that show, as with most non-sequitur things. But Jeff should be back next week here with us in the interim to save you from the monotonous droning of just me for an hour. Pat Mullen is back with us again. Pat, how you doing this evening?
Well, I'm far less excited about Invader Zim because I believe in secure borders.
Oh, yeah. If we can't keep Invader Zim out, we're doomed.
We're in trouble.
All right. In fairness, he arrived he might have arrived 12 years ago. Yeah, I blame the transitional period between Clinton and second Bush, just for the record.
Fair.
All right. We're not going to go through the entire main card for UFC Fight Night 134 because it was terrible. I struggle to fully express this. Let me start with just the time involved in this card. The main event started 6.5 hours after the first prelim. I expect these things to be roughly 6 hours start to finish. I accept this. This is the way it's going to be for the next 5 months until we get off of Fox Sports 1 and onto the ESPN. Either ESPN Plus or ESPN proper will not have events paced this badly. I mean, they can't. I cannot fathom them being worse than this. I mean, I know how they could do it. I genuinely do. Like, I can absolutely see the production decisions that would lead to these being longer, but I can't fathom them actually being implemented. It baffles the mind. It genuinely baffles the mind. And on this card, we had 10 fights go to decision. This ties for the most decisions on a modern UFC card ever. I think there's 3 or 4 events that have that share that particular distinction. And of those 10, 9 of them happened in a row. This was awful to sit through. So we're going to talk about the main event because it's relevant. We're going to talk a little bit about the co-main event because it's relevant. And then I'm just going to go through the rest of this and we'll talk about any major takeaways we have, but we're going to save the majority of our energy for previewing UFC on Fox 30 because happy times, not ugh. All right, with that out of the way, Pat, you didn't watch this live, I seem to recall. You have the benefit of fast forward for these fights. I envy you. I just want to say that.
It might be my strategy going forward.
I would highly advise it. I'll warn you, there's a couple that are just going to make you want to pull your hair out.
Yeah, I think I passed through one of those already.
Which one?
All of them.
Yeah. They blur together. All right. But the main event, this was sad. in some respects. Necessary in some, sad in others. Anthony Smith defeats Mauricio Shogun Rua via knockout, elbow and
now
punches.
the recognized light heavyweight champion of the UFC.
God. It's sad that beating two guys who've barely been relevant for over a decade gets you to that point at light heavyweight, but it does. I mean, this fight lasted 90 seconds. There wasn't a whole lot here. Smith did a lot of circling. Shogun did a lot of stalking forward, but Smith kept kind of picking at him. And anytime Shogun would actually try to close distance, he wouldn't move his head, which is one of the things he actually used to do rather well, was when he was leaping to close distance, because he had such explosion in his legs. He could move his head, he could close distance quickly, and he could surprise you with punches, because his punching technique has never been great, but it's always been relatively powerful and mostly surprising, is where he gets a lot of the efficacy out of that, all of which has diminished with time. Instead, as he was trying to come in, he caught a pretty stiff 1-2. Might have just been a right from Smith. Started backing up. Smith followed him, battered him, hit him with this wicked elbow that split open his forehead, knocked him out standing. He hit him like 3 more times as he was falling before the ref jumped in. I mean, for those of us who remember Shogun in his prime, even his resurgence, because after he debuted in the UFC, there was a lot of that's when he started having knee issues. He had a few lackluster performances, but even kind of through that, those of us who remember him in that form, I mean, his 2005 run was absolutely spectacular.
Monstrous.
It's the second best light heavyweight run of all time, behind only, what John Jones did to that division when he just massacred everything. So it is sad, but light heavyweight needs new blood, and Anthony Smith does qualify, despite being a veteran who's kind of toiled around the regional scene a little bit between light heavyweight and middleweight. I mean, again, I can only take the man so seriously for knocking out Rashad Evans and Shogun Rua in 2018. But the division needs talent, and
he has beaten two former champions back to back in knockout fashion.
In less than 3 minutes.
He is clearly the best light heavyweight in the world and clearly deserving of the championship.
Yeah, they're just going to have to... I saw someone speculate that they should just hold a press conference and declare Yoel Romero the light heavyweight champion if he's going to fight in that division. And given that Alexander Gustafsson just wound up pulling out of UFC 227 with a minor injury, is anyone going to oppose that decision? I mean, in all seriousness, if they decide to do that, is anyone really complaining? I mean,
you know who is? Anthony Smith. That's who.
No, Smith can fight him for it. Like, that's fine. He's gotten out of this fight unscathed. He said he was willing to fight Gustafsson at 227 on short notice. Just schedule Romero and Smith, with Romero holding the belt for whatever value it has, having a champion theoretically defend rather than fighting for a vacant title, and we'll all start moving on, because it's a mess. But anyway, the state of that division aside, I mean, Smith was a good but kind of middle-of-the-road middleweight. Is this down to a combination of his opposition and not cutting weight, or is there something he's doing technically that's kind of giving rise to his success now?
Well, I mean, he fought a smart tactical fight tonight with who he had in front of him. Same way he did to Rashad. It's not necessarily that he's doing anything outstanding. It's that he's just fighting correctly against who he's put against, is the best way to say it. You pointed out against Shogun that Shogun was trying to do his usual advancement, but what Smith did was he disrupted his rhythm by just pecking away. He didn't throw anything devastating when Shogun was trying to find his range. He just did enough to offset Shogun's rhythm, make him have to change his angle and change his approach. And he did that constantly until it was time for him to fight back. And that's a smart tactical way to fight Shogun, especially now. He did it, and he did it well. It was well executed, it was well planned out, and it was done right because he got the win, and he got the win in less than 3 minutes, which was outstanding. And again, we're putting it into perspective. We understand Shogun in 2018 versus, even Shogun in 2013. And that's far beyond prime Shogun by about 7 years.
Truth.
So, yeah, we understand where it is and what he's doing, who he's doing it against. But it's at least promising that he's able to apply a strategy, have the technique to work that strategy enough to win with it.
And, I appreciate the man's finishing instinct. He's a nasty finisher. If he gets you hurt, he's knees and elbows and blood and guts until you fall over. I mean, he gave Thiago Santos a pretty good fight before Santos caught him with that liver kick. So, I mean, again, he certainly seems to be kind of growing into himself at this point, and I'm interested to see what he does going forward. Again, he said he was willing to fight Gustafsson at 227 before Gustafsson officially pulled out of that card after he had a couple of opponents change on him. I mean, Gustafsson was on that card. He was supposed to fight, I forget who. Then they shifted to him and Özdemir. Then Özdemir fell out after he broke his nose, and now Gustafsson has some minor injury that's keeping him out. The broadcast and the post-fight interview with Smith hinted at Smith versus Jimmy Manuwa. I'm down for that. I mean, Manuwa is at least...
What has Jimmy Manuwa done to earn a title shot? That's my question.
Dude, nobody deserves a title shot at light heavyweight, all right?
I'll tell you who does.
Everyone in that division deserves a medal of shame. Just for existing in that division.
Well, there's one guy who I'll say doesn't, and we'll get to him later. It's one of the few bright spots of the night.
That's fair. What was the other thing? I laughed because prior to this fight, Daniel Cormier mentioned if he was going to defend the light heavyweight title, he wanted to fight Shogun. I mean, look, I'm not the biggest Daniel Cormier fan, all things considered. His fights don't resonate with me for some reason, and I'm not sure why. Which is not to say
I would also like to publicly call out Tank Abbott at this point if we're going to be playing that game.
Yeah, I mean, that's what that was. Like, I'll fight Shogun. He's a legend. Yeah, and Tyron Woodley wants to fight Nick Diaz. Like, what are we doing, people? This is just so...
We're doing Pat versus Tank 2018.
I mean, you could co-main under the upcoming Tito and Chuck fight. I mean, look, you might actually kill Oscar De La Hoya if you get in a room with him, but he'd promote it.
He would. I'd split it with him.
Fair enough. All right, in the co-main event, this is the last one I want to touch on in anything approaching, again, in-depth off of this. Corey Anderson defeats Glover Teixeira via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the board. This was... If Anderson was going to win, he was going to win like this. I forgot to mention last week when we previewed this that Teixeira was dealing with a late notice change of opponents. Teixeira was supposed to fight Ilir Latifi here. Now, I'm not saying that that's the only reason he lost. He looked old and slow in this fight. And considering he's almost 40, that's to be expected. But he also went from a short, stocky, single-punch power wrestler, and when I say power wrestler, I mean he relies on physical strength, to a longer, slightly faster hand speed, more fleet of foot chain wrestler in Corey Anderson. And there's some significant differences there that clearly hampered him in his preparation on Fight Night. And again, if he'd been preparing for Anderson the whole time, would it have been different? Maybe not. Probably not, all things considered, but it does bear noting. Corey was just able to out-wrestle Teixeira, and working with... a lot of the guys seem to have picked up on what fighters like Khabib and Ben Askren have been doing in terms of ignoring certain jiu-jitsu sensibilities and positional decision-making when you're in an MMA fight versus when you're in a jiu-jitsu tournament, for example, especially a point-based tournament. And it's led to a real kind of resurgence in tactics as it pertains to the wrestler versus grappler dynamic. Because instead of trying to take the back, instead of playing positional jiu-jitsu with a superior jiu-jitsu practitioner, you find a ride position, and you just kind of ride from there and beat on him. And it's a lot harder to do something from turtle guard, especially if you're being hit, than it is if you're than it is to kind of reverse out of having your back taken, especially assuming the average level of MMA grappling. It's much more difficult. And good on Anderson. It's a pretty significant win for him. I forget who he called out, or if he did. He might not have, actually, now that I think about it. I might be confusing.
Rogerio Nogueira.
Yeah.
Randy Couture.
Little Nog's at least an active fighter in theory. Now, let's just line up all the aging legends that are still cluttering this division and get them out. I mean, I love Little Nog in a lot of respects, but it's time to be done. So, I'm curious as to, you were watching a little bit of this fight prior to the show starting, Pat. So, what are your thoughts on what you've seen so far? I mean, Corey Anderson's not blowing my skirt up, so to speak, in terms of my interest in him, but he's certainly coming along, all things considered.
Yeah, he's not necessarily when I want to watch an entertaining fight who I'm going to look to, and that's nobody at light heavyweight, really, to be fair.
Pretty much.
Yeah. The first I saw his fights with Jimmy Manuwa, and I saw him against OSP, and he got knocked out, unfortunately, in both of those fights. And I kind of was like, well, maybe that's the best we've had to see of him, because he got matched up with Jimmy Manuwa, who at the time was a very tough opponent considered for him, and he lost. Okay, no big deal. And then he fights OSP. OSP finishes him with a big head kick. Maybe this guy, maybe we've seen what he has, and there's not much there. Beats Patrick Cummins as he should have. And this fight with Glover was, I want to give him credit for fighting, again, much like we saw from Anthony Smith, tactically very sound against the opponent he was dealing with. But I will say I think this is the worst Teixeira has looked to me. And I was someone who was never all that impressed with Teixeira, even when he came in as a hype prospect.
I'd say the only time he looked worse was the Gustafsson fight, but there was also a significant talent differential there that
and that's
does not exist here.
Yeah, I think he looked bad due to how Gustafsson fought him. I think he looked bad because he had no answer for what Alex was doing to him. In this one, he looked as though he was able to tactically fight out of some situations that Smith put him in, but he couldn't pull the trigger all the way. There was one point, and we were watching this, literally I finished this fight while we were on the air. He had a guillotine on Corey Anderson, and it wasn't super threatening, but he had the ability to really torque it and get his body in better position, and he couldn't do it before time ran out on him in the round. And I think that's kind of a microcosm of the whole fight. Anderson gets in after they do a little bit of standing. Anderson gets in, clinches him. Glover fights off a takedown. Glover gets taken down. Glover gets back up. Glover gets taken down again. And it was kind of, in that respect, almost lather, rinse, repeat how you would start a round from these two. And Glover just didn't fight with urgency to avoid these situations. And Anderson was just content to never let him get to an advantageous position. And, again, I think what you brought up about the wrestler versus the grappler argument, I think Teixeira is a better grappler than what he showed here. I think the biggest problem Teixeira has always had is he seems to resent when he has to grapple, which has always been a shame because that's the strongest aspect of his game. He just doesn't like it. He's like a kid who's really talented at math but wants no part of being an accountant in life. That's the best comparison I can make. And we saw that here. And, you've said the best strategy for a wrestler against a grappler is not necessarily to get them on their back or to take their back. It's to put them in a position where you have a dominant frame that you can hold and you can beat them up from. So getting waist control from the side and punching, elbowing, doing that work, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just some guys either don't have the patience or they just fall back on bad instinct to try to not work that position effectively. And we didn't really see that here, which if there's anything I think that Corey Anderson deserves credit for, that's it.
All right. Again, Anderson continues to move forward. Teixeira starts looking old. They'll both Teixeira will stick around for a while because the division sucks. But we might get Teixeira versus Shogun scheduled next. I don't know if there's some training partner thing that would prevent that, but if not, you have two old, kind of sad Brazilians. Let them go hit each other a few times.
Loser leaves town.
I would be okay with that, too. All right, as for the rest of this card. In a fight that made me annoyed, Abu Azaitar defeated Vitor Miranda via unanimous decision, 30-27 twice, won 29-28. Azaitar, his striking, and I mean this as kind of an insult, it reminded me of the Deontay Wilder school of, I'm going to put my head down, I'm going to come forward, and my punches kind of wing. And I hate that. I really don't like that style of striking. I understand it serves a purpose, and if you should have it in your arsenal, but if that's all you can do... I was looking at Miranda, and every time Azaitar started to kind of bull forward was, okay, angle and uppercut, his chin's right there, or, step back, throw a knee up the middle. You'll catch this guy because he's dropping his head, and he's protecting it with his shoulders because of how he's swinging from peripheral attacks, but his center line is relatively open, and for some reason Miranda never really tried to counter that. They both gassed. Not impressed with either guy, all things considered. Azaitar's strong as an ox, I'll give him that. He muscled his way out of some tricky positions that better fighters wouldn't let him do, but you work with what you got in that respect. Marcin Tybura defeated Stefan Struve via unanimous decision, 230-27, 129-28. Stefan Struve continues to annoy me.
Not be good.
I couldn't help but, because of the timing, Jack Slack was able to watch some of these fights live, so he did some live tweeting. And at one point during this fight, he just tweeted out about Stefan Struve, "Throw a jab, you big pink dick." And I can't find any fault with that with anything he says there. I mean, Struve is an enormous human being. He's
the world's biggest midget.
And the way he fights, yes. I mean, he's 7 feet tall. I don't care that the UFC says 6'11 and a half. That's bull. He's 7 feet tall.
7 feet tall, for F's sake.
I mean, bear in mind, he's also not 6'11 and a half. He is 7 feet. He just doesn't like to be promoted that way. I think if you actually measure that guy, he's 7 feet tall. And he's got 84 and a half inches of reach, which is an identical reach to John Jones, and yet if you watch those two fight, one is a masterclass in distance management, the other is a masterclass in how not to do things.
I've always made the comparison for Struve that, for any boxing fans out there, Stefan Struve is Michael Grant. Michael Grant was a 6'7" heavyweight, chiseled out of stone, supremely long reach, and chose to fight inside constantly and put himself in danger constantly and got hit or knocked out at various points when he shouldn't have, and didn't have anywhere near the success he could have with the physical gifts he has. Stefan Struve is the MMA equivalent to that. He is a 7-foot-tall guy who cannot manage distance, who cannot control distance, who cannot keep distance. It is literally insane how bad someone with his dimensions can be at this. And even John is not necessarily the best at doing it with his hands, but at least he can do it with his kicks and his movement. Struve does none of that, never has. It's why he's been on the receiving end of so many highlight reel devastating knockouts. I'm actually surprised Tybura didn't knock him out tonight.
Tybura was more focused on out-grappling him than fighting him on the feet. On the plus side, Struve did get a new scar. An elbow from Tabora on the mat opened up the area under his bottom lip pretty badly, actually. It was a pretty gnarly cut. Let me see. Danny Roberts defeated David Zawada via split decision. There was 130-27 for Zawada, which I don't agree with. You could get 29-28 Zawada. In fact, I think that's what I had. And then two 29-28s for Roberts, which is also perfectly defensible. 30-27 for either guy, to me, is not so accurate at all. Decent enough fight. This was your fight of the night, which just indicates how poorly the night went. There were some fun scrambles, but a lot of sloppy stuff. There was, and again, it was just, this was the tallest midget of the evening when it came to handing out fight of the night. Danny Roberts called out Neil Magny. Sure, I could not possibly care less. Narsat Hakparast, bit of a surprise here. Defeats Mark Jacasey via unanimous decision. 230-27s and 130-26. 30-26 is justified. There was a near finish kind of towards the end of the second round. Hakparast, again, really surprised me. I kind of figured he'd be a bit of a softer touch because the UFC likes Jacasey, but no, Hakparast came forward, man. He's a little tank. A lot of credit to that guy. Good output, good variety in his offense, good body-to-head stuff with his punches. I mean, it's still kind of developing, but he's a young guy, still kind of young in the sport as well, so, but definitely somebody to keep an eye on. Then on the rest of the prelims, we had Damir Hadzovic defeating Nick Hine via split decision. That's a load of crap. This should not have been a split decision. 229-28 for Hadzovic, 129-28 for Hine. When they were announcing the scores and they said 29-28 Hadzovic, 29-28 Hine, Hadzovic is flummoxed by this, turns to look at Bruce Buffer like, what the hell, man? And Buffer actually winks at him to let him know, no, it's okay, you don't have to attack me. It's a small thing, but the camera caught it perfectly, and I appreciated it. I was 30-27 Hadzovic. This was just his jab completely shut down and flummoxed everything Nick Hine was trying to do. Wouldn't let him close distance, bashed up his nose and both of his eyes, offset his timing and his rhythm. And then as things went on, Hadzovic just kept kind of building off of that jab and cracked him a few times. Hadzovic is only 2-2 in the UFC, but that's a really deceptive 2-2 record. Because one of those losses was his debut against Mirbek Taisimov, who would be in the contender rankings if not for the Russian government screwing him over on his visa. And Alan Patrick, who's significantly underappreciated. And he gave Patrick a pretty solid fight, all things considered. Bartosz Fabinski ended a 3-year layoff by defeating Emil Weber Mech via unanimous decision, 30-27 and then 29-28 twice. Mech just can't stop persistent takedown, and he's never been able to stop a persistent takedown.
Is he the same fellow who we saw fight Alan Jouban?
No.
Who am I thinking of?
That fought Jouban?
Kamaru Usman. He fought Kamaru Usman.
He fought Usman, yes, and the same thing happened, but Usman was significantly better at it because Usman's significantly better than Bartosz Fabinski everywhere.
That's the fight I was thinking of. I knew the name and I couldn't place him at first, so I had to think about it, but yeah, he got abused by Kamaru Usman.
And again, you get abused by Usman, okay, Usman's really good. When that happens against this guy, we gotta talk. Nad Narimani defeated Khalid Taha via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the board. This was a much closer fight than 30-27 would lead you to believe. Taha took this fight on short notice and normally fights at bantamweight. And he gave Narimani a pretty significant fight, so good for him. Alexander Rakic defeated Justin Ledet via unanimous decision, 30-25 and two 30-24s. For the record, I was 30-24. Rakic disrupted him early with some really powerful inside leg kicks. Then once he figured out he could get Ledet down without too much trouble, just kind of smashed him from top position. Not quite bargain basement version of Cain Velasquez, but an off-brand version of Kane on the ground was what he was kind of going for here. So credit to him, man. Rakic is underappreciated. Dude's 10-1 on a 10-fight winning streak, 2-0 in the UFC. We should probably be paying more attention to that guy. Then on Fight Pass, our best fights. Manny Bermudez with this beautiful submission sequence defeats Davey Grant via triangle choke in the first round.
Dead.
Bermudez cracked Grant with a right, got on his back, he got full mount, went to lock up a triangle choke. Grant rolled, he wound up in a reverse triangle, swung around, switched to a triangle armbar. When Grant rolled to avoid that, he rolled back to mount, locked up the triangle, rolled to his back, and put him to sleep. Bermudez has a pretty wicked guard. Again, we haven't seen him against the truly elite level yet, but there's some serious ability that he's got on the ground, and we should be paying attention to that. Also at light heavyweight, because this card was just designed to fail, Darko Stasic defeated Jeremy Kimball via TKO in the first round. Not a whole lot to kind of dissect here, but some decent enough fundamentals from Stasic before he blocked a takedown and just kind of punished Kimball off of that to get the finish. And kicking everything off, Ping Yuan. I'm going to mispronounce that guy's name every time.
I'm never going to stop laughing every time I hear it.
Defeated Damian Stasiak via unanimous decision, 30-27 and 29-28 twice. Solid enough debut from Ping Yuan.
It just doesn't stop being funny.
I know. I will make a point to say it more often for you now. Just kind of good everywhere. Good punches, decent grappling, a little too eager to sell out for a guillotine attempt, but a lot of guys his age and with his experience that think they can do that to the world and just haven't been taught better yet, kind of go for that. So, I mean, solid enough stuff. And Damian Stasiak's not a nobody to beat. So, all right. On that note, Pat, there's a lot of crap. Any diamonds in the rough for you? Anything that you want to touch on?
Yeah, I'm going to have to track down this fight between Rakic and Ledet because, as established on this show particularly, I was a big fan of Ledet and thought there was a massive amount of potential for him. And quite frankly, I still do. But from what I have been told about this fight, and from what I understand, and again, remember, this is Ledet's first fight at light heavyweight. Certain advantages he enjoyed at heavyweight, like a big speed differential, much better vision at takedowns coming at him, and fighting somebody with a more diverse striking pedigree. Nothing was really in the cards for him in this one, and he looked completely outclassed. I think, I think this might have been maybe an experiment for him to see how he would do at 205, but I think he's going to learn in this fight he's probably better off at heavyweight based on what he's going to see there. And, again, Rakic, great performance. Let's see him going forward doing this against get him a top 15 fight at this point. He's won 2 impressive fights in dominant fashion. He's on a 10-fight winning streak now. He's only lost his pro debut. He has a good, diverse game. Put him in there with somebody. All
right. On that note, that event comes to a close, and I will try never to speak of it again because, yeah. All right. On the plus side, Saturday the 28th, we have UFC on Fox 30. Again, one of the last events on their Fox deal before we move to ESPN, and we've got a darn good main event a rematch between Eddie Alvarez and Dustin Poirier. These two first fought at UFC 211, and I'm of the opinion that Poirier got screwed in that fight. I thought they should have disqualified Eddie Alvarez.
Agree with you.
They were having a good fight through 2 rounds, and then in the second round, right near the end, Poirier was picking Alvarez apart, and then hurt him, got anxious. Alvarez swung back and clipped him. We had some momentum swings. Then, as Poirier was down on a knee against the fence, Alvarez kneed him in the head. Now, let me be clear. When I say I think it should have been a disqualification, I don't think Eddie Alvarez was
deliberately trying to do that.
Yeah, but
I do.
That's fair. I didn't think that then. I don't think it now. But at the same time, it was a foul. It was a clear foul. And at some point, we have to start acknowledging that fouls like that should not result in no contests. This wasn't accidental in the sense that Poirier was in an in-between spot and got caught with a knee that was borderline. He was just on a knee. I mean, I was also of the opinion, I thought they should have disqualified Michael Bisping against Jorge Rivera for a similar situation, but
that was pretty flagrant. Josh Koscheck's and his eye pokes are pretty flagrant. This wasn't intentional on your end. I think it was, but whether it was or wasn't, it was a foul. It was a pretty clear foul, and normally in this fight, you'd lose by DQ.
Yeah, again, I think that was an error on the referee's part. I thought they should have given Poirier the win. Even if they'd given Poirier the win, I would have been fine with them running it back because it was great for as long as it lasted. Both guys have been doing pretty solid work since that particular fight. Alvarez knocked out Justin Gaethje. Poirier submitted Anthony Pettis and knocked out Justin Gaethje. I was leaning towards Poirier the first time, I seem to recall, and I'm going to continue with that for a very specific reason. One of the things that Poirier showed in the two fights since this is that, for some reason, despite all the losses he suffered because of this same flaw, the fight with Alvarez was the one that seemed to cue him into not getting crazy when he has someone hurt, to not getting wild and brawling, to maintaining a degree of composure. And because he showed that in both the Pettis and the Gaethje fight. In fact, in the Gaethje fight, it's what won him that fight.
Yes, it is.
And if he's finally figured out that problem with his game, there's two things that, you need, to really trouble him, you need big power and fast hands. And while Alvarez has those things, he's also a slow starter. And is also kind of content to get pushed around a little bit. And Poirier's more than happy to push you around if you will let him do that. I imagine we'll get a similar circumstance to their first fight in that Poirier takes the first. If he doesn't finish, he'll take the round rather convincingly. Eddie will kind of wake up in the second. Or Eddie will come out like a bat out of hell and then freeze up after the first round, which is
also a distinct possibility.
The other way Eddie Alvarez fights. Either way, I like Poirier all the way around again. As long as he doesn't get sloppy and crazy when he hurts Alvarez, he should win and he should finish him, because he should have finished him in their first fight, but when he hurt Alvarez, he got wild and brawly, when if he'd stayed measured and precise, that was his fight to win and he threw it away. So again, I like him here again. If he wins this, again, the top of the division's in a bit of a weird state, but I don't hate Poirier and Khabib. I don't like his chances necessarily, but I don't hate the fight. So,
I think it's a bad style matchup for him, but it's a fight that makes sense to make.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody would really disagree with that if it happens.
Yeah, assuming we still don't have any movement on the McGregor front, and I assume that there is no movement.
Yeah.
And I assume that there is no movement on the McGregor front at all times at this point.
Well, that's the correct way to assume it.
Prove me wrong. If anybody, I annoy the cult of Conor on a regular basis. Look, prove me wrong, and I'll say something different. So, what do you think about this one? Again, their first fight was a fair amount of fun, both from a casual and a technical perspective. What are you expecting out of the rematch, Pat?
Here's the thing, and I've always cracked on Eddie Alvarez for this, and it's not to slight him. It's not to say I think very little of him as a fight. It's nothing about that. What it is about to me with Eddie Alvarez is that he just never fights smart. He always does something to give his opponent the ability to beat him. Excuse me. Excuse me. Whether it's fighting Conor McGregor at a distance and letting Conor...
That was so stupid.
Yeah. or whether it's allowing Poirier to measure him for left hands repeatedly. One of the things Eddie doesn't do really ever is adjust. And you can't do that as a fighter. You can't not adjust and change things up, or you're going to get beaten by anybody who pays attention to you. And, Eddie and Justin Gaethje are two sides of the same coin in that respect. And Poirier arguably has beaten both of them. He officially has beaten Gaethje. And I'm of the belief that he was winning the Alvarez fight and on his way to officially winning that fight before the foul happened. And I think he'll do even better here, to be honest, because I've never seen Eddie adjust in a fight. I've seen Eddie fight the same way each time that he's fought. And, granted, certain rematches he did better. When Eddie finally had his rematch with Michael Chandler, he performed better, but I think that had more to do with him just wanting it more that night than Chandler did. And I don't think he's 2-1 against Chandler. I think Chandler's 2-1 against him in my book, the way those fights went.
Yeah, there was one, I can't remember which fight it was, but there was one that I thought had some really bad scoring. I think it was their second, that I scored for. It was the one that went the distance because they finished each other, I seem to recall, that I thought Chandler won but got screwed by the judges on.
Yes, that would also be how I felt about it. But, again, Eddie in rematches doesn't make adjustments. Do I see him doing it at this stage of his career here? No, I don't. And it's not a knock on him. It's just he is who he is, and that's what he's going to be. And what he is has been good enough to win him the Bellator Lightweight Championship, the UFC Lightweight Championship. He's made a lot of money. Good for Eddie. And I like watching him fight because I know he's going to try to excite me and do that. But in a fight like this, it's going to spell disaster for him because Poirier is a guy who has, over time, really tried to work hard to get better. I think he is a much better fighter than the guy who we saw fight the Zombie and the guy who we saw get beat by Cub, and especially the guy who got finished by Conor. I think after that Conor fight, when he moved, back up to lightweight, I think he really came into his own in terms of putting stuff together. He had to slip on a banana peel with Michael Johnson, but I also think he caught Johnson just having a great night.
Well, and again, Johnson has decent power and really fast hands, and Poirier never got out of first gear.
No, and Eddie can hit you, but Eddie's not very fast with his hands. Eddie's very deliberate, and you can see what he's throwing coming. Johnson is a sprinter for sure. If I've compared him to any boxer, it's Zab Judah. He starts off with blinding speed and really good power, and as soon as you get out of the first third of the fight, he's got nothing left.
That's fair. That's fair. I hadn't thought about him relative to Judah, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, he's very dangerous to start. He looks good, and then he's got nothing. That's kind of what Michael Johnson is, but that's a bad style matchup for Poirier. Poirier is a bad style matchup for Eddie, especially if he's continued to work hard and try to get better. After the Alvarez fight, he beat Pettis and he beat Gaethje. Gaethje's a very stylistically similar guy to Alvarez in terms of what they're going to try to do to you. They're going to push a very not blitzkrieg pace, but a very consistent, steady pace through the fight. They're going to keep working. They're going to come and pressure you, but they're going to be there for you to pick apart. And Poirier gets hit more than he should, but Eddie hasn't shown that he's got the power to capitalize on that, especially not in the early stage of a fight. Eddie's power is more one of a, I'm going to wear you down and beat you up and grind you out type of thing. He doesn't have that snap to his punches, and he doesn't have a great kicking game, so I don't think he's likely to finish Dustin early, and if you don't do that, he's probably going to beat you up and finish you.
And for the record, I agree with you. I give Gaethje more of a pass on his fighting style because I think he's mostly blind without his glasses.
Also, fair point.
I mean, I think the last time we talked about him, I brought up, you'll appreciate this, I brought up Harry Greb because, dude fought with a glass eye for his entire career.
And what did he do? He got right on top of you smothered you, hit you with everything legal and illegal that he could, and just overwhelmed you.
And one of the few guys to actually beat, heavyweight champion Gene Tunney, who's
The only
undefeated
guy.
at heavyweight.
The only guy to beat Gene Tunney.
Yeah, Tunney went undefeated at heavyweight, beat Jack Dempsey twice. I mean, granted, there was some controversy around the rematch, but boxing history. All right, in the co-main event, I'm down for the. I think I proposed this fight. I'm so glad it's happening. Jose Aldo's fighting Jeremy Stephens. This is a rough fight for Aldo, who's coming off of the back-to-back stoppage losses to Max Holloway. I mean, for as great as Jose Aldo was for as long as he was great, he's only 1-3 in his last 4, and he's been finished in all 3 of those losses. And if there's someone who's going to capitalize on him slowing down, on him losing his dynamism, on him losing elements of his defense, and his kicking game kind of going away, it's a guy who's going to push kind of like Jeremy Stephens does. Jeremy Stephens, I've harped on him for being overhyped for his knockout power, and I still maintain that. What Jeremy Stephens has more than one punch, knock you out power, which isn't, and again, it's not to say he doesn't have that necessarily, but if he hurts you, and because he hits hard enough to do so, if he hurts you, he does everything he can to kill you. I mean, the damage he did to Josh Emmett, knocking him out in their fight, was horrific. He knocked out the Korean Superboy before that. He's on the best run of his career, which is kind of surprising given how long he's been around. But he's been incorporating leg kicks. He's been fighting smarter. If this fight were happening 5 years ago, I'd pick Aldo in a heartbeat. Heck, if this fight were happening 3 years ago, I'd pick Aldo basically in a heartbeat. But where they stand right now, I'm rooting for Aldo because I have such a profound attachment to him and his style and elements of his combatic brilliance. But I see a very clear way for Jeremy Stephens to win this fight. It involves a really tough first round, but a round fought at a decent pace. And once Jose starts slowing down, he starts pouring it on. And just kind of wilts him, not as proficiently as Max Holloway did, but more brutally than Max Holloway did. And that's saying something, because those were pretty brutal finishes from Holloway in their first fight. But I'm looking forward to it. There should be plenty of violence to come out of this fight. I mean, watch me jinx it now, but that's how I see it. Pat, am I crazy? I mean, again, he might be on a bit of a slide, Aldo, but those losses are to McGregor and Holloway, and they're 2 of the premier fighters at the going right now. Has Aldo slipped? Is Jeremy Stephens rising, or am I just crazy?
I believe that styles make fights. I know you do too. McGregor aberration aside, if you look at the Holloway fights with Jose Aldo, where did Jose get hit and get hurt? He was on the outside with his chin held a little too high against a guy who had a long enough reach and good enough footwork to cut him off and hit him when he was there to be hit. Because he wasn't controlling the outside the way he had done successfully against people like Chad Mendez, who even hit him on those exchanges by just throwing late wide. Same thing with Frankie Edgar through their 2 fights. Stephens has a 1-inch reach advantage here, but it's not a pronounced style of fighting. Stephens likes to fight inside. He likes to be in close where he can really land some big hooks and uppercuts inside. He likes to bait you and throw a counter over what you throw. Jose is going to be in a position for the first time in a while where he's going to be the guy who gets to control the outside where this fight takes place. And when he's able to do that, he's very, very difficult to beat, especially when he opens up with leg kicks. I've never seen Jeremy throw great leg kicks, which is the best answer to a guy who wants to kick you in the legs. But I've also never seen him defend leg kicks all that well. We know that Jose's game is he wants to go in there and put on a show with his striking. And this is going to be a fight that tells us really where he is. If he just happened to fight the two best guys in his division and lose to them, and that he's still good, just not good enough to beat those two, or if he really is on the slide, if he loses to Jeremy Stephens, because it's not a knock on Stephens, stylistically this matchup should favor Jose Aldo. And I'm still picking Aldo. I think Aldo can outmuscle him in the clinch if it does get to the inside and use his Thai background and land some vicious knees. And I think when it stays on the outside, he's much better in terms of his speed. And I think he'll be able to clip Stephens before Stephens is able to clip him. The biggest things Jeremy Stephens is going to have to do is, we talked about his prevalence of getting hit when he pulls out of exchanges and circles one way. He does it with his chin held too high and his guard dropped. He gets too cocky and doesn't read the distance well, and he gets hit. Holloway was able to do it to him. Frankie had success when doing it by throwing very long, wide punches that shouldn't land but did. Even Chad Mendez in their rematch was able to do it a time or two, once with a real good hook that hit Aldo flush, I remember. And another time in close, he was able to sneak in an uppercut by out-muscling Aldo on the inside. But that's really specific examples of what Jeremy Stephens is going to have to do. I also wouldn't be shocked if we see Aldo utilize a little bit of grappling here. That being said, Stephens doesn't do well if you're quicker than him, and Jose is. The last guy who I remember Jeremy Stephens being at a specific speed disadvantage against was Frankie Edgar. And even though he had moments in that fight, he lost. And I still believe that Jose Aldo is a better fighter and more dangerous fighter than Frankie is.
I'd say he was at a non-trivial speed disadvantage against Moicano, too.
Yeah, I don't remember the Moicano fight. I may not have seen it, and I really haven't.
I remember this because you and I disagreed about the decision. I gave that to Moicano because all he did was get Stephens to keep coming forward and kept sniping at him with leg kicks or long combinations. And, I mean, the argument for Stephens in that fight is largely based around he kept moving forward.
The Diego Sanchez?
Similar, but he was more effective than Sanchez ever was. But it is still the Sanchez precedent, all things considered.
Yeah, the only Moicano fight I remember off the top of my head is when Ortega submitted him with the guillotine. But that being said, again, he's at a significant speed disadvantage here, which has always been his Achilles heel. Even when he's gotten better, which I think the version we're seeing of him now, again, and I've said it time and time again, this is the best Jeremy Stephens we've seen, and he's made improvements to his game. One of the things he hasn't improved on, that I've seen at least, is dealing with somebody who is quicker than him. I think even Josh Emmett was able to be quicker than him at times in their fight. He just happened to recover. He just happened to recover very well, and Emmett isn't experienced enough to know what to do in that regard. If you walk into that kind of a blind shot from Jose Aldo, I still think he's got what it takes to pull the trigger and finish you. I don't think this is going to go to a finish. I think Aldo is going to win a decision, but I think it's going to be a clear one, and it's going to be really crushing for Stephens in that respect, because if he was ever going to get a title shot, he's got to win this fight.
Yeah, and to be fair, if he wins, I mean, it's so weird with Max Holloway out right now and some of the uncertainty surrounding him. But you could do, again, if Stephens wins here, him and Ortega for, I hate to say it, for the interim belt. It makes all the sense in the world in a lot of respects. Of course, I favor Ortega there because, God, I'm so pissed I can't see Ortega and Holloway. I was so looking forward to that fight because I favor them.
Not as much as Brian Ortega was.
I favor them. I mean, because I favor them. Not to say they can't lose, but I favor them against the rest of the division. Those are the two best guys. Anyway, next up. God, I used to be excited when Joanna fought, you know? But, sadly, not the state of the world right now. Former champion Joanna Jedrzejczyk tries to rebound from her 2-fight losing streak, both of those to Rose Namajunas, and she's getting a... I won't say a gimme, but this is a stylistically favored matchup for her against Tecia Torres. Tecia is coming off of the loss to Jessica Andrade, who should be fighting for the belt. I'm of the opinion that this fight plays out very similarly to Joanna versus Andrade. Because both Andrade and Torres are smaller, muscular, like to push forward and try to cut you off, get into the clinch, muscle you there. That's kind of the totality of their game plan. Now, Torres is a more diverse striker in terms of utilizing kicks, but Andrade is better at that game. And we saw that when they fought, because Andrade just did Torres' game better. We've seen Joanna beat that style convincingly. I mean, that fight with Andrade wasn't even close. And I think this plays out basically like that fight does, unless those fights with Rose really took something out of Joanna. We're going to see a lot of long jabs, 1-2s, front kicks, leg kicks, bait Torres into coming forward, angle off, counter. We're going to see what Joanna's good at. And I think this is kind of, again, this is not a gimme, but this is very much a get-well fight in a lot of respects. I do question why she's still hanging around strawweight. I mean, I don't think she just matches up well with Rose, and I think she'd have a better chance of making waves at flyweight, and she wouldn't have to cut as much weight. But I'm not her coach; I'm just an observer. So, anyway, Pat, what do you think about this one?
I think this reeks of get-well fight, for lack of a better way of saying it. I think you described what Torres does really well, and the fact that we've seen Joanna beat this style, beat it convincingly, and against different fighters, and fighters who implement the style better. You know, Jessica Andrade would be one. A little bit different but similar would be Carla Esparza, who again is going to look to get inside, look to clinch with you and take you down. I think Carla shoots a better double leg than either of them do, but I don't think she's as strong as either of them physically. But again, this is a style that Joanna does really, really well with. She's going to be in position to be the matador against someone who is not a convincing counter striker that could endanger her. And to be fair, we didn't know that Rose Namajunas really had that capability before she did it in the first fight. She dedicated a lot of time to improving and really making a name for herself in that fight. And it was impressive, and it was even more impressive in the rematch. But this is a fight that I would guarantee you Joanna's team picked out and said, we need a fight to get her confidence back, to let her do what she does well. This is how we do it. Let's pick somebody here who's very low risk, doesn't present a lot of varied threats to her. This is what you're looking at. You're going to see Joanna put on a show probably, talk about how she wants to get her belt back, and immediately because she looks so good, people are going to jump on and say, you know what, yeah, I want to see Joanna fight for the belt again. She looks great, man. Maybe there's something there that we didn't see the first 2 times, which there isn't, at least right now, but it's going to be a showcase fight for a fighter who needs it and could potentially grow from it, and the respect that the confidence is back.
All right, and kicking off the main card, we have Alexander Hernandez, who you may never have heard of, but he made a really big first impression when he got into the UFC on short notice and knocked out Beneil Dariush in the first round. And looked pretty darn good doing it. Wasn't a sloppy punch, wasn't a lucky punch. He set that thing up. And he is fighting Olivier Aubin-Mercier, who I hate. OAM's coming off of his first TKO win ever, when he stopped Evan Dunham with just a really nicely timed knee to the body in the clinch that crumpled Dunham over and then didn't give him time to recover. which is how you have to do that. I mean, Aubin Mercier's been working on his striking, but he's still primarily a grappler. Body lock guy, get to the back, kind of work you over from there. There's a significant number of unknowns around Alex Hernandez. And that's why I have to go with OAM here. I know him. Not to say that Hernandez can't win. He very clearly can. He's got power. He's a physical specimen. And he might be a supremely gifted counter-wrestler and just shuts down Mercier's game in that respect. But I can only speculate so much, and my last couple of speculative picks have bitten me pretty hard in the butt, so I'm going with Aubin Mercier here, but I'll put it this way. I won't be surprised if Hernandez wins, because there seems to be a fair amount of potential there. Although this is a non-trivial acid test. Pat, you familiar enough with Hernandez to make a pick here?
This was the glove touch guy, right?
I seem to recall, yes.
Where Dariush said, "Oh, well, I thought he was coming to touch gloves, and instead, he used that to hit me, and then as soon, he hurt me, and then as soon as that happened, he jumped on me, and
it wasn't quite that fast, but yeah, there was there was a very brief touch of gloves, and then Hernandez clocked him.
Well, good for Hernandez.
Dariush kind of fought back after that. It wasn't again, like, that wasn't the punch that knocked him out, but it set the tone, and Dariush never got back into it mentally.
Yeah, so I'm he's based on that alone. I like where his head's at. I like his instincts, and I like what he brings to the table. But that's all I've seen of him. I'm not a huge fan of Mercier, but say whatever you want to say about the kid. He is a really good controlling grappler when he gets you in position. He's kind of gone up and down. Where I remember he lost the final of the Ultimate Fighter Nations, right?
Yeah,
to
Laprise.
Yeah, and I saw his last two fights. I saw the fight with Dunham, which I wasn't necessarily impressed with. Because no disrespect to Evan Dunham, I'd be much more impressed if he beat Dunham in 2010. And he fought Tony Martin, I remember, in a fight that was kind of blah.
Yeah, well, that's also Tony Martin.
Yeah, it went back and forth. Listen, I'd love to say I think that Hernandez is going to come out and smoke him the same way. And truthfully, I think that's Hernandez's best shot, is go right at Mercier and try to hurt him early. But I'm going to pick Mercier here by decision, only because I haven't seen enough of Hernandez to really judge where he stands other than that.
All right, as for the rest of this card, there's some good fights here, actually. For some reason, Jordan Mein.
Oh, boy.
I feel so bad for him every time he fights at this point. I mean, and it's
this poor kid.
I mean, he's coming off of that win over Eric Silva that thankfully got Silva out of the UFC, and I am forever in his debt for that. But he's fighting Alex Morono, and Alex Morono may not be a world beater, but he's good enough to beat Jordan Mein, given what Jordan Mein has shown recently.
Yeah.
I mean, Morono came into the UFC, won his first two, got knocked out by Nico Price, that got overturned for BS reasons. Because, look, guys, I know you don't want people fighting high, especially with marijuana, but the testing for it is still kind of crap, and it has nothing to do with Price's ability to punch him in the face. He lost a split decision to Keita Nakamura, and then he tapped out Josh Berkman, but I got Morono here. A really good lightweight fight that's going to fly under the radar. Cajun Johnson is fighting Islam Makhachev. For those of you unfamiliar with Makhachev, he is
Sambo world champion.
15-1 overall. His only loss was his second fight in the UFC when he fought Adriano Martins and got clipped with a punch. He's on a 3-fight winning streak with wins over Chris Wade, Nick Lentz, and a knockout win over Gleison Tebow. This guy is not someone to sleep on necessarily, and I wasn't that impressed with Johnson's last fight when he beat Stevie Ray by split decision. I thought Ray had that, I seem to recall. Oh no, that came down to one round that was just weird, now that I try to remember it. I got Makhachev here. Dude's a smothering force.
He also trains with Khabib, so there's that.
There is that. At featherweight, Hakeem Dawodu fights Austin Arnett. I don't know enough about either guy. Dawodu lost his UFC debut in short order. He was tapped very quickly. And Arnett, I don't seem to recall having fought
He's making a
in
debut
UFC
here?
before.
Yeah, I was pretty sure this was his debut.
I will confirm that, because I think you're right. No, he got TKO'd by Corey Sandhagen at UFC on Fox 27.
Oh, well.
How could I forget that wonderful one? Body shot loss too. I'll go with Dawodu. Who cares? Speaking of who cares, at light heavyweight, we have actually a light heavyweight I kind of think has some promise in Godzimirod Antagulov taking on Iwan Kutelaba, because Slavic names. Kutelaba is from Moldova? Yes, he's Moldovan, and Antagulov is... he's just Russian, right? Yeah, Russian. Antagulov is 20-4. He's on a stupid long winning streak, like 13 fights, something like that. He's 2-0 in the UFC, 2 submission wins in the first round. Kutelaba is coming off of that weird suspension for ozone therapy and the blood transfusions associated with it. Kutelaba was last seen knocking out Enrique da Silva. I like Antagulov here. I don't think Kutelaba is going to be able to keep him off of him. Then on Fight Pass, we have John McDessie and Ross Pearson. I'm not sure why either guy is still around. McDessie won his last fight. Pearson also won his last fight.
I was going to say, was Pearson's last fight? I think it was actually a win. And he fought the Japanese fella, Hirota, right?
Hirota, yeah. To break a 4-fight losing streak.
Yeah.
And he proceeded, I thought it was hilarious because he lost and then called out the guy who knocked him out, Dan Hooker, and Dan Hooker then went on to knock out Gilbert Burns. Like, buddy, you don't want any of Dan Hooker. Just, it's not a good idea at this point. The man is underappreciated and will kill you. I'll go with Pearson here, but that's kind of a pick'em. At women's flyweight, Alexis Davis fights Caitlin Chukagian. I can't stand Caitlin Chukagian's fights. Oh yeah, she fights out of Mark Henry's gym, right? Yeah. The Enzo Gracie Combat, yeah, that Frankie Edgar's gym basically. Yeah, I hate her fights. I got Davis here, who's looked pretty good at flyweight. Won her debut against Liz Carmouche. I know that was split, but it really shouldn't have been. I mean, Carmouche closed really strong, but I don't think she won the other 2 rounds. At flyweight, Dustin Ortiz, desperately trying to right the ship of his career. He's on a 2-fight winning streak, though. He beat Alexandre Pantoja in his last fight. Is fighting Mateus Nicolau, who's another really underappreciated guy who's 3-0 in the UFC. Won his debut with a Japanese necktie, which is always sweet. Beat John Moraga, beat Louis Smolka. I kind of like Nicolau here, and I think relatively highly of Ortiz. Then at women's it's just strawweight. There's no male strawweight fighters in the UFC. At strawweight, we have Randa Marcos, which will make Pat happy.
Yes, indeed. Fighting
Nina Ansaroff. Ansaroff's on a 2-fight winning streak. I kind of like Marcos here, actually. Not a lot, but...
She just beat Angela Hill, did Ansaroff.
Yeah. After losing a tough first round, she made some adjustments to that. I kind of like Marcos there, but again, not a whole lot. Then at lightweight, Devin Powell, who has lost his 2 UFC fights. He got smoked by Drakkar Klose and then lost to Daryl Horcher. Fights Alvaro Herrera,
who is also on a 2-fight skid.
Yes.
By Von Fluchoke in his most recent outing.
If you lose by Von Fluchoke, you probably just shouldn't be in the UFC. All right, I've said that before.
And right before that though was I remember this because Vincente Luque got him with a really nice Darce choke.
That was a slick Darce, and Luque's again, another somewhat underappreciated guy who's won his last two. He tapped Nico Price. He knocked out Chad Laprise. I mean, Luca's no one to trifle with. I'll go with Powell just because I don't know. I don't really have a reason there. The loser should be fired.
You don't pick guys who lose to Von Flue chokes in 2018. It's a rule.
I will make one exception for that. If he's on the local scene, I might pick Yushin Okami.
Listen, I love Yushin Okami, but I would not pick Yushin Okami against any top 25 middleweight at this point.
Again, if he's in Bellator or lower, I might pick him. But beyond that, nah. Above that, no. All right. Anyway, again, there's a couple of decent fights kind of hiding out on that card, and again, the main card is very, very solid. So, what are you looking forward to, Pat? What are your burning desires?
Aside from the main card, which we've said it really is a stacked card. We've called it UFC Calgary the Apology, based on their last outing there. Which if you don't remember,
oh god, that last event was so bad.
If you don't remember, I believe it's still the only time they've run Calgary. It was UFC 146, if I'm not mistaken. 149, which was Uriah Faber, Renan Barao in
their first fight.
In a really boring 5-rounder.
And I've defended that fight because it's not bad, but that
it's not
card
badly
killed
fought.
it.
It's not a badly fought fight. I'll say that. It wasn't the most thrilling fight. It just, it was just kind of there. And then, I mean, if you look at what was on that card, we had Czech Congo, we had Sean Jordan.
That is legitimately one of the worst heavyweight fights ever.
Yeah,
you had Tim Boach and Hector Lombard, which was terrible. You had James Head and Brian Ebersol. Matthew Riddle fought. Good God.
And he went to a no contest because he couldn't stop smoking the reefer.
The Nick Ring and Court McGee fight, which was another hilariously bad decision between those two.
Yeah, that was
the whole story. The whole story between that fight was they fought on their season of Tough, and Ring got a really dubious majority decision. Then had to pull out of that season. McGee won it, so they rematched here. And for some reason, again, the decision went to Ring, even though I clearly thought that was McGee's fight. You had Ronaldo and you had Rivera and Delorme that went to a no contest.
Yeah. Literally the only highlight is Ryan Jimmo's 7-second KO of Anthony Peroche, which, as we've said, is the only time Ryan Jimmo was ever entertaining.
Yeah, I mean,
this whole card was trash. Let's be done with it.
Bad.
This whole card was trash.
I am sad remembering that card because I think
that's
I
why
covered it.
That's why this is UFC Calgary the Apology. Look, I love Jordan Mean. I just think he got thrown into the lion's den way too early at way too young an age, and it ruined him too fast. I will always fondly remember his fight with Matt Brown. That was just, 6 minutes of awesome. Yeah, it was literally 6 minutes of awesome. But that fight changed him in a lot of ways, and not for the better. He had to take a lot of time away at a certain point and couldn't get consistently into the cage because of injuries and various other things. And since then, I mean, he just ended that 3-fight skid by beating Eric Silva. But before that, he lost decisions to Bilal Muhammad and Emil Weber-Meek and was knocked out by Thiago Alves. And granted, those are 3 of his most recent 4 fights. One of them took place in 2015, one of them in 2016. 2017 is the first year he's had multiple fights in 3 years. That's not a good thing. And he's still, I don't even think he's 30 yet. I think he's 28, which is sad.
But born in 89, yeah. He's 28. He's younger than I am. Jeez.
Yeah, I remember him being a couple years younger than me, and it's just really sad that he got thrown to the wolves like that fast. I hope he wins. I will never stop hoping he's able to turn his career around because he did have a lot of promise and a lot of potential. Makhachev and Johnson, that's a good fight. Makhachev, aside from getting slept by Martins, I like what I've seen from him so far. And, again, beating Gleison Tibau in 2018 is not title contender fodder, but he knocked him out, and that's not his game. So that's impressive. Aside from that, I want to see Antigulov. I haven't seen him yet. Rob has kind of talked about how this guy's grappling is really legit, and considering there's a pretty significant dearth of that in the light heavyweight division, he's definitely somebody to keep an eye on. McTessie Pearson means nothing, but it has the potential to be either really fun or really bad. So if it goes really fun, I won't be surprised. Nicolau against Ortiz is interesting because Nicolaus, I mean, he's not, again, he's another guy who's not overly impressive when he wins, but he wins convincingly. And he's done it against McDeath. He's done it against John Moraga, who has a lot of tools at his disposal. If you can beat Moraga, you're probably pretty decent. And then Louis Smolka. So to see him against Ortiz, that's a really interesting fight on paper. And again, I am probably the biggest Randa Marcos fan that does not live in Canada or Iran or Iraq, or is of Canadian Iraqi ancestry. She's had some tough luck in decisions. She just beat Juliana Lima in her last fight, which was impressive. She lost kind of a dubious decision to Alexa Grasso when Grasso missed weight.
Yeah, I thought Grasso won that, but it was a close fight.
Yeah, that's one that could have gone either way, so she's had some tough luck on that end. Just like when she beat Carla, I thought she beat Carla, but it went to a split.
I thought she won that fight too, but again, there's weird arguments in play.
Yeah, so I do see this fight going to the cards. Neither one of them is really a known finisher, but based on the style matchups at play, I think Randa is the more dominant of the two. I think she's better at controlling the action, and I think it's going to be fought inside for a lot of it, where Randa's really more at home and can easily transition to takedowns if she so chooses. But it's a really, listen, this is as good a card from the UFC as you'll see all year. So I'm really hyped for it. The fact that we're even hyped about like 4 or 5 prelim fights is really telling how good this is. I'm excited for it. I can't wait till next week.
All right. I will have coverage of that, of course, this Saturday in the MMA Zone of 411 Mania.
And I just got a report about some odd tweeting from Daniel Cormier.
Oh, what's he doing now?
Well, perhaps we can address first the Alexander Gustafsson situation.
Yeah,
and we'll transition there.
It got mentioned a little bit related to the previous card, but Gustafsson was supposed to fight in the featured bout at UFC 227, which is 2 weeks. Yeah, August 4th, so 2 weeks. And there was some weirdness about that whole thing. They couldn't really find him an opponent for a while. Then they moved Volkan Oezdemir from his fight with Shogun. Can we all be grateful that didn't happen? Because, Smith knocked him out. Oezdemir would have done the same thing. Then Oezdemir fell out of that fight after he broke his nose. And then, so there was some trying to find him an opponent for that card, and yeah, we need a relevant light heavyweight, and that's tough to find, and we need one who's willing to fight Gustafsson on short notice, which is also tough to find. And it didn't come together when Anthony Smith, again, after beating Shogun, said, yeah, I'm fine, I'm healthy, I'll do it. It wasn't too long after that news broke that Gustafsson had to pull out of this card entirely with some minor injury issues. And again, apparently this has been in the works for a while. It wasn't oh crap, I don't want to fight Anthony Smith thing. It was, there were certain fighters or fights that he might have been willing to try to work through, and then that just didn't happen. And again, minor injuries, so he's trying to be rescheduled again for some other time this year. That fight is off the card. There's also another fight for UFC 227 that only has one fighter at the moment. They don't have an opponent for Shoeface yet. Antonio Carlos Jr.
I think the only person more upset about that than Antonio Carlos Jr. is you, because you don't get to write Shoeface in your coverage.
I don't write Shoeface. I refer to him by his name. I just don't get to talk about him. Now, he was supposed to fight Derek Brunson, and I actually kind of like him in that fight, but Brunson pulled out. And now they're still looking for a replacement. I imagine sometime in the next week that will be announced to be off the card as well. So anyway, tell me what good old Daniel Cormier is getting up to.
Yeah, so a little less than an hour ago, Daniel Cormier got to Twittering and specifically addressed Alexander Gustafsson, and here we have the statement. Dear Alex, I don't know what happened to you going back to the Rockhold situation. You have always been a stand-up guy, but your behavior changed. From calling a guy out the day after he got knocked out to now offering to fight me knowing I have a broken hand after Volkan couldn't go. Now you've turned down Yan, turned down Khalil, all while calling for a heavyweight title fight. Now, moments after Anthony Smith does his work like an animal, you decide you're hurt. Man, I respect you as a fighter. I will always be grateful for October 2015, but you and I won't share the octagon again. I'm disappointed in who you've become. You are so entitled. Man, I can't deal with delusional people. Good luck recovering. Our time has passed. See you from the commentary table. Hashtag, we go our separate ways.
Kind of ironic that he can't deal with delusional people considering the gym he trains at.
And we go to the statement from Alexander Gustafsson's management. Doctors pulled Alex from the card last Friday, days before Anthony was trying to compete. Before that, we were trying to stay on the card. Assuming we could get cleared, we were prepared to face anyone. We assumed it would be Khalil Roundtree as he was ready to fight, and we were told Yan would fight at another time. We also offered to fight DC at heavyweight if he was healthy, so Alex was prepared to face anyone, ranked or unranked, but the doctors said he was unfit to compete. It was determined last Friday he would not be on the card, days before the Smith contest.
Yeah, which is my understanding generally of that circumstance as well. He pulled out of a few media appearances recently that were supposed to take place over the next couple of days without giving a reason that seems to be connected to this. Look, I'm on record. I thought Gustafsson beat Cormier when they fought. I scored that fight for Gus. I seem to recall. And I wish he could stay healthy because I love watching him fight. But some guys can't stay healthy. I mean, DC, you happen to train with one of them. More than one, actually, all things considered. You know, it's... And look, Cormier wants his money fight to retire on. And look, I hate it. I hate Brock Lesnar versus Cormier. I hate the circus. I do not watch MMA for the circus. People do. People buy it. I get it. I'm not complaining about it in that respect. We know what path Cormier's on. He's right at the end of his career, if he's to be believed. And I don't see a whole lot of reason to disbelieve him necessarily.
No, neither do I.
He wants fights that will pad his wallet, limit his risk of taking damage, and that will get buzz around him. He wants to build... I mean, for a guy who has accomplished everything that he's accomplished, there is shockingly little buzz around the career of Daniel Cormier. He wants to get that, and if he has to get that by going through the circus and then destroying Brock Lesnar, because he will, then that's what he's going to do, and I'm not going to begrudge him doing what he thinks is best for his career. I may not like it, but I get it. And he doesn't want to fight Gustafsson again. And quite frankly, I don't blame him because he very nearly lost that fight.
Yeah, aside from John Jones, obviously, I think Gussie was his toughest fight by far. And I scored it 48-47 Gus. I could see the argument 48-47 DC, but he got pushed to his very limit. And I could see why, if he's winding down, he wouldn't want to deal with that again. I get it. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not criticizing him for it. I completely understand where he's coming from with it, but I think to do what he's doing is that he's trying to create a narrative to sway public opinion and possibly maybe get interest in a Gustafsson fight to get one more fight after Brock if he so desires. But here's the problem with DC. He is a bland, boring personality. I'm not saying that to insult him. That's fine.
Not everyone's going to be flamboyant and outgoing. He's a funny guy, and he's a decent commentator when there's not a wrestler for him to nut hug.
Yeah, he has wit to him. He has a dry kind of wit, and he's quick, but he's not charismatic. He doesn't capture attention with how he speaks. He's just not that guy, and that's okay. He's turned in one of the best careers that nobody talks about, being that guy. And he'll go down as one of the best fighters of his era, potentially ever.
I'd say
he really ever. He just has the misfortune of sharing his time frame with the one guy who was better than him. And it's really a shame, you know. And there's great fighters in history in MMA, boxing, kickboxing, who've just fallen victim to fighting in the same time frame as someone truly, undeniably special. You know, it's that hard silver medal to take, but that's what Cormier's got. And he's going to try to capture popular attention by fighting Brock because, quite frankly, that's what you do because Brock's still a bigger star than anybody in the UFC.
Pretty much.
Regardless of a lack of skill or the fact that he shows up once every couple of years, whatever it may be. Because Brock's a star. Daniel Cormier is not a star. He's going to have to settle for being one of the very best fighters ever, and there's no shame in that. But him trying to do these types of things, it comes off as petty. It comes off as him being delusional in his own right. And it comes off as him not wanting to fight a guy who arguably beat him the first go-round and stands, I'd say, at least a 50-50 chance of doing it again.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the way I perceive the narrative. I'm not saying that it's going to be universally seen that way. I just think there's a really good chance that that's how it is seen because of the nature of Cormier's personality.
And, I mean, the most bought, to the best of my knowledge, we don't have numbers for 226 yet, but to the best of my knowledge, the most purchased pay-per-view involving Daniel Cormier was his rematch with John Jones when he got violently knocked out.
Yeah, he got violently knocked out.
And I mean that's a hard image to shake, especially if only half the audience sees your redemption fights.
And the fact that it was the second time.
Yeah.
That's the harder part. Is that was the second time that John got the better of him, and the second time
again the drug issues aside, essentially without controversy from where I sit.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and it was, you know, it's one of those things where, yeah, I think DC fought a better fight even though he got finished.
Oh, he did.
Because he had more moments in that. He actually won a round on most cards in that fight versus the first go-round.
There were people who had him up 2 rounds going into that third round.
Yeah, I didn't have that, but I had him at least, I believe, winning the second round, if I'm not mistaken. I think that was kind of unanimously the round everybody thought he won. But that being said, he still got finished, and definitively finished. And that's where, when he's putting out articles saying that about himself, that's how he sees himself, I'm always going to be second to John, how do you expect the public to take you any differently?
I mean, I appreciate the honesty on his part. I genuinely do. It's nice when you deal with a lot of guys who, you know, I've won 2 fights in the UFC. I'm coming for the top 10. Never mind that I've never fought someone who's won in the UFC. I mean, it's nice to see a guy who kind of will talk about himself like that. But like you said, by the same token, if you're out there publicly saying, no, I mean, until I beat John, I'm not better than John, people are going to hear you and they're going to believe you.
Yeah, and that's what it comes down to. And when he does something like this, after issuing that kind of statement, how are we supposed to take you seriously? You know, again, you're so good. You're so good in that cage. There is no denying that, no matter how much someone tries to hate on Daniel Cormier, whatever. He is an incredible fighter, okay? There's no denying that. But he's a poor speaker, and he still doesn't know how to sell a fight. John Jones sold their fights. Firstly, by being John Jones, and secondly, by being the much better talker of the two and knowing how to instigate and get people interested. Daniel Cormier has never been able to do that, no matter how hard he's tried. If he's trying here to kind of drum up interest in a fight with Gustafsson, I think it's failing miserably. I don't even think Gustafsson's people would be interested in fighting after those tweets. It seems like he doesn't want the fight, which is what I think that's what public perception is going to take it as, that he doesn't want to fight this guy who pushed him to the limit and arguably beat him. He's going to take his fight with Brock and cash out and go home. And hey, there's nothing wrong with that. You've captured titles in 2 weight divisions. You've beaten the best guys put in front of you, except for the very best guy of your era. No shame in that. You did it across 2 divisions.
And you just knocked out the best UFC heavyweight champion ever in the first round.
In the first round, essentially really coming off of that 1 left hook. But you don't need to do this stuff when you're that kind of fighter, because it really puts not an asterisk, but it casts a shadow over what you've accomplished when you resort to these things. When you're not a good speaker, when you're not charismatic, when you're not a personality, you have to let the accomplishments speak for themselves at that point and just do what you do best. When you try to do this, it comes off as very, and I'm going to use a really insulting word, and I don't want to be insulting, but it's the only word I feel is accurate. It comes off as really pathetic.
So UFC 227 is now absent a highlight fight. It currently stands, the main event is the rematch between Dillashaw and Garbrandt, because why not just kill off Cody Garbrandt's title aspirations? And look, I don't mean to sell him short. He very nearly won their first fight. He could very well win here. These are 2 excellent fighters. But if Dillashaw wins, and if Dillashaw wins again convincingly, you have now put this young, talented fighter. I mean, Garbrandt's only, 27?
Yeah.
You've now put him in a position where he is out of the title picture for at least 18 months. And, again, I just don't like it. I don't like it this soon. I kind of know why they did it, but I don't like it. And then the co-main event is the rematch between Demetrius Johnson and Henry Cejudo, which should be a good fight. I mean, Cejudo's gotten better since their first fight. I don't expect DJ to just run him over this time, but I still expect DJ to win. But, I like both those fights. I like all the fighters involved from a technical perspective, but they kind of needed the Gustafsson Özdemir fight as a diversifying element, because right now you're only appealing to fight fans who really like the technical aspects of what those top 2 fights bring, and that's not what the casual audience is going to be interested in. So I'm curious how they're going to structure this, because, again, there's a couple of decent fights on the rest of that card. I don't mean to sell everything short here necessarily, but it's going to wind up being a not very purchased event. As for other news, UFC 228 got fleshed out a little bit. This is their return to Dallas. We got our co-main event signed. Nico Montano finally signed to fight Valentina Shevchenko.
Wait, she's not going to fight Sajara Eubanks like she wanted? Oh, no.
I know there was such a weird fan response to Shevchenko after her flyweight debut, because she just murdered that poor girl.
Yes, she did.
It seems like everyone has forgotten how she normally fights against skilled competition, which is not to say badly, because I'm a big fan of Shevchenko, but she's not a finisher necessarily as a general rule. And you really have to be into the technical side of what she does. I was very interested in her fight with Holly Holm as it played out. I was interested in her rematch with Amanda Nunes, which I thought she won, for the record.
Agreed.
But I think if anyone expecting her to come in and just bulldoze Montano and finish her quickly, I think you're in for an unpleasant viewing experience. I expect Shevchenko to win, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's going to be if it's one-sided, I don't expect it to be A, as lopsided as her last fight, and B, as action-filled, for want of a better phrase, as her last fight.
I've seen armed robberies that were less one-sided than that fight.
Also true. I expect Shevchenko to win, but I expect it to go the distance, and I expect her to just consistently shut down and frustrate Montano every step of the way, because that's what Shevchenko does.
I don't even think that goes the distance, because I watched the season of Tough with Montano winning her championship, but a lot of what Montano is able to do is because of not being spectacular anywhere, but being very consistent and just not making terrible decisions versus a lot of inexperienced or ill-equipped opposition. I do think Shevchenko is going to finish her. I think she's going to just periodically, systematically break down Montano with kicks from the outside, lead her into left hands, and I think Montano is going to take a beating really badly in this fight through. She may have a moment or two very early, but Shevchenko is going to adjust and beat her up. You have to remember, Shevchenko's taken the best shots from Amanda Nunes. Shevchenko's, been able to outwork basically in terms of her footwork and angling. Do a number on Holly Holm due to that and really outdo her completely with it, which Holly hasn't been beaten like that ever. Holly was beaten by dogged pressure and grappling by Miesha Tate. She was beaten by fouls by Jermaine Durandame.
And bad scoring.
And bad scoring, yeah, but really the fouls more than anything affected that. She was beaten by Cyborg by fighting the best female fighter out there, probably ever at this point in MMA.
I'd agree with that.
And to me, the best Cyborg we saw was that Cyborg that night. No one's ever beaten Holly in a tactical, strategic fight without massive damage one way or another the way Valentina did. Nico doesn't have any of the stuff we just talked about bringing that to the table. She hits hard enough, but she doesn't hit hard. She can grapple, but she's not an expert grappler. She moves, but she's not a great mover. She's just completely outgunned here. Unless I'm really missing something, I just think Valentina's going to break her down and finish her between 3 and 4.
For the record, that fight is not the main event. We do not have a main event announced yet for 228. The other featured bouts are a fight between Jessica Andrade and Karolina Kowalkiewicz, which will go badly for Kowalkiewicz, I tend to think. And a bout for those of us who love spinning shit. Yair Rodriguez fights Zabit Magomedsharipov.
Oh my goodness, just let them spin and bump into each other like a couple of tops or something.
I really hope Zabit doesn't spin at all in this fight because he doesn't need to. Just let Yair do his stupid 360 tornado kicks, take him down, smash him from top position. This doesn't have to be complicated.
Hey, it was enough to beat BJ Penn.
Ugh. It was enough to get a split decision over Alex Caceres.
We're not even trying.
Rodriguez just isn't good. Like, he got hyped because he was beating guys and looking good, but they weren't any good to begin with. Then he runs into Frankie and gets massacred. And this one probably looks similar. I mean, that's not a bad card, 228. You've also got Aljamain Sterling's fighting. Jimmy Rivera versus John Dodson's on that card. It's not bad. Needs a good main event, but we'll see what happens. Was there anything else from this last week?
I mean, the main stuff we had. Like, we knew we were going to talk about the Gustafsson thing, and then we got that DC tweet, and then we got Gustafsson's team answering back, and, like, just, it never fails that stuff is going to happen like that. Do we want to talk about Cain Velasquez possibly transitioning out of MMA?
He's too fragile for MMA, which is sad because he was so great. But if he wants to go, he showed up at the WWE's Performance Center, whatever the hell they're calling it.
That would be it.
It's them, and then there's the UFC's Performance Institute, and there's just too many stupid names for me to keep track of.
There's a couple things going on. I mean, that's one of them. Cain did have workouts in Florida at the WWE's minor league compound. Well, fair enough way to say it.
Yeah, that's fair. Which would be
Okay,
hilarious, considering that DC's the one who loves professional wrestling, but to watch
Yeah.
Kane go into it and actually do something.
There's a video of DC doing some moves through the week, but you can actually find that on the 411 Mania website.
Yeah.
Brock Lesnar has already gone through a test in the USADA pool,
Woohoo.
so he is officially back in the pool. There has been one test.
Look, if USADA can explain what's going on with his teeth, I'll stop whining about their existence.
They've been punched and misshapen from that. Based on Brock's UFC potential return, Mark Hunt's attorney is going to potentially amend the lawsuit.
He should.
Which, remember? Do you remember what the official categories he sued for were?
Oh god, wasn't one of them that at the UFC knew Lesnar had failed drug tests and promoted him to the fight anyway?
Fraud, which would tie into that.
Yeah.
Civil conspiracy, which is the big one that ties into that.
Yeah, I remember that.
The other two were battery, which is hilarious in its own right, and my personal favorite, racketeering.
The supreme irony being, if he's able to prove any bit of the racketeering, the entire structure of the UFC has to undergo a drastic shift, even with the new ownership.
The original complaint was Lesnar, White, and the UFC acted in concert, as set forth fully above, to defraud Mark Hunt and commit a battery against Hunt by a scheme to knowingly pit Hunt, a clean fighter, against Lesnar, a doping fighter, to the wrongful benefit of the defendants and the detriment of Hunt. On information and belief, White and the UFC were intentionally delaying the announcement because Lesnar was using banned substances and needed additional time in order to circumvent testing procedures.
Look, Mark Hunt is a hilarious human being. I mean, I wish him all the best with his lawsuit because it kind of needs to happen, but if they amend it, you know what? Good for them. They should.
I mean, it's very silly, but that's what it is. Conor is about to get a plea deal in his
I thought
assault.
his team refuted those claims.
It's still up in the air. The likelihood is he's going to cop a plea no matter what. There was the initial report that came out that they've reached a deal. Well, no, they have not reached a deal, and his team is not. His team is very hush hush on the whole matter. Because TMZ were initially the ones to report it and say, oh, well, if he does this, he's going to avoid deportation and all this stuff. What is known is that they've dropped the felony to a misdemeanor, so no matter what, he's not getting deported. And the likelihood is basically going to be probation and a few minor fines here or there. The actual court date is Thursday in Manhattan. So we're going to maybe get some clarification out of that. Maybe. Oh, and speaking of one in my wheelhouse, just set for Fight Night 137, Smiling Sam Alvey.
Yeah, and Little Nog.
To take on Little Nog.
That'll be something.
I mean, Sam Alvey's going to throw punches, and they're not going to miss. And Nog is not going to take him down, even though he should. And yeah, there's that.
Apparently, Jake Ellenberger is still with the UFC. He's going to fight Brian Barberina at UFC Fight Night 135.
And somehow that has not already been made a loser leaves town. Also coming out of my wheelhouse, Paige Van Zandt has had a second arm surgery to heal her arm that was broken in her last fight, where, if you remember, I was adamant that she should fire her entire team for allowing that to happen.
You were.
And knowing that a second surgery was needed for a throwaway fight, I'm correct. So basically, this is how bad this break was. Not only did it require just a second surgery to go in, but they took bone fragments from her hip and moved it into her arm. that's a surgery that people who are, 23, 24 years old generally don't have unless they're in either a massive car wreck or some type of like off-road vehicle accident. It's really serious when you have to go to that level. So for them to allow her to fight through this for 2 rounds and that she has to go to these lengths just to rehab her arm for general health, not even for fighting, is absurd. And I really hope that if she's going to continue with MMA, that she's going to go somewhere else. And if she doesn't, I really hope she retires, because stuff like this is going to repeatedly happen to her.
We got an update on the timeline for Robert Whittaker's return. He said it won't be until 2019 with the schedule for healing his hand after the surgery. Makes me sad, because I love Robert Whittaker, but it takes how long it takes. I look forward to his eventual fight with Kelvin Gastelum, assuming Gastelum's cholesterol does not skyrocket and he has a heart attack between now and then.
Is this the worst, best championship reign ever?
Yes. I'm really hard pressed to think of outside of Dominic Cruz when he became UFC Bantamweight champion the first time. Yes.
But I would even say this because, and listen, I love Dom. Dom's probably my favorite fighter that I ever got to see. Just at the time I was following MMA and what he was doing, and I love Dom. I always will. But at least in his reign, he was able to have a successful defense in a good fight that counted.
He got 2. I seem to recall he beat Mighty Mouse and he beat Faber.
Well, yeah. The Faber one was very high profile, and that was a great fight. I don't necessarily think the Mighty Mouse fight was a great fight so much as it was a great performance against a guy who hadn't hit his stride yet. And it's more significant really in hindsight than it was at the time, if that makes sense.
I agree.
With poor Robert Whittaker, you've had the 2 fights with Romero, neither of which is a successful defense because one of them couldn't be for the title. And it's just, you feel for the guy so bad. He had these injuries, not Cruz-level injuries, but he had them. It's just, he can't, and now he's going to be out till 2019, when the likelihood is if he was healthy, he probably could have fought again, say October, November range. He can't catch a break. And for someone as good as him to be shelved as long as him and without a successful title defense as long, it's really depressing for fans.
It's a crying shame because he's clearly the best middleweight in the world.
Arguably the best fighter. Arguably.
There's a very cogent argument for him being the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world right now, if you look at his actual skill set. He's had 2 great fights, his last 2 fights, but just the circumstances around... I can trace the totality of this circumstance in some respects back to a fight that was supposed to take place between Robert Whittaker and Michael Bisping. They were supposed to fight in Australia in 2015, I want to say.
That sounds about right.
And Bisping was Bisping. Whittaker was on the way up. It was supposed to be this either gets Bisping back in towards the title picture or it cements Whittaker as that guy on the up and up, and it fell through. I think Bisping had some health issue that caused it, if memory serves. But if that fight goes through, A, Whittaker wins. Even in 2015, I like him a lot in that fight. B, because of that, Bisping is not free from a timeline perspective to step in and fight Luke Rockhold on short notice and derail the whole division for 18 months.
Yeah.
So if Bisping had been able to take his ass kicking on time, at this point Whittaker's champion and has at least 1 defense. Probably 2. Because he probably would have beaten either Romero or Jacare for the belt. It's crazy. It's just crazy that he's this good, universally acknowledged as being this good, and the circumstances around him are what they are. It's just nuts. Speaking of people who want rematches, we mentioned that Junior Dos Santos wants a third fight with Stipe because he doesn't love his brain cells. And Stipe says he wants an immediate rematch with Daniel Cormier. And I don't blame Stipe for wanting that. He's not going to get it. Unless the pay-per-view numbers for that event exceed all expectations, he's not getting it. Which is sad, because I thought they had a good fight for as long as it lasted, and I like Stipe. But we all know where this is going, folks. And Stipe is going to be pissed because Stipe is a very straight-shooting guy. I would not want to be whoever has to fight him next, because he's going to fight pissed, and he's going to hurt somebody. And it's probably going to be Junior, because that's just how that's going to work. I think that's everything as far as news items go, unless you had something else you wanted to touch on, Pat.
No, that was pretty much what I had.
Alrighty then. On that note, let's go ahead and wrap this up. We will be back next week to review UFC on Fox 30 and to preview UFC 227, which again will be a hardcore fans' happy place, assuming it holds together. But we'll sadly do not very good pay-per-view wise, in all likelihood. I mean, look, the last time when Dillashaw and Garbrandt fought the last time, it was on they were the co-main or the third fight down from Bisping and GSP.
Yes, that was the MSG card.
So I say that with negative speculation, but I want to say it is possible that those two made a lot of fans out of people who tuned in for the GSP Bisping affair. So this might do better than we expect, but I'd be surprised. Let me put it this way: it won't come as a total shock if this does above 300,000, but I'd be a little surprised. So anyway, that's what we'll be doing next week. What would you like to plug, Pat?
So you guys have heard most of my stuff on source material, on Radisson Broadcasting. Mark and I are actually working right now on a upcoming retrospective of Bill Watts' Mid-South UWF territory. For those who've been following our watch-alongs, we've gone to the Mid-South region a couple times and had some fun looking at it, and it kind of piqued Mark's interest a little bit. The UWF is one of those territories that the WWE owns the footage of, and they did a DVD set but didn't really do a thorough documentary about the territory itself, the way they had done for ECW, WCW, the AWA, etc., etc. So we're going to kind of do a version of that, and we may be including some watch-along footage with it. We're not sure yet. But we are gonna be looking into the territory, its high points, its low points, why it succeeded, why it ultimately burned out, and what could have been done differently with it. We're gonna look at some of the featured stars who came out of that territory and concepts themselves that came out of that territory. And of course, nothing in terms of that territory would be complete without a look at the man himself, Bill Watts. So be on the lookout for that. There's a couple other things in the works.
You and Mark talking Bill Watts will be hilarious.
Mark and I are very compatible because we're very opposite in terms of how we believe in things.
Yeah, which is why that'll be funny.
Yeah, so we're going to probably have very different hot takes on Bill Watts. Now keep in mind, this is Mid-South Bill Watts, not WCW Bill Watts. So keep that in mind when you listen to it. Also, Gavin Napier and I are working on a show to deal with the recent HBO Greatest Fighter Tournament, which involves fighters who've appeared on HBO multiple times through the years. They took who they felt were the 32 best fighters to ever be on HBO, pound for pound. They bracketed them, and Twitter voted on who they felt were the absolute best.
Geez. That's a terrible way to do that.
It's probably the most terrible way to do that. So Gavin and I, once their bracket completes, are going to basically look at the bracket as they set it give our takes on it. That's probably going to be a 2-part show because there's a lot of ground to cover. So we're probably going to do, 2 rounds, one show, 2 rounds, another show, and then a final. So it's looking that way. But basically, to give you an idea of where the bracket stands at the moment, the final 4 in the bracket are Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson, Sugar Ray Leonard, and Floyd Mayweather.
God, at least 2 of those shouldn't be there.
I mean, there's one glaring one that shouldn't be there, but we know why he is. Sorry, Iron Mike, but yeah.
I was gonna say Sugar Ray too. Like, it's the wrong Sugar Ray. Like, the other one was better.
Well, yeah, but HBO didn't exist until 1973.
I know.
There.
But if you look at cap on that, but
if you also look at the bracketing, I think Leonard has, for the most part, a pretty favorable bracket. So there's also that aspect of it too. They
didn't match him up with Duran, so we could.
They didn't. They did not. However, they did match him up with Marvin Hagler.
He beat Hagler? Oh God.
Yeah, and I don't agree with that decision any more in 2018 than I did in 1987.
This is just people who know who Sugar Ray is because he's got a personality, but have never actually watched a Hagler fight.
Mike Tyson was voted over Roberto Duran, so there you go.
Oh God, that's just stupid. I appreciate Mike's contributions, but no, Roberto was a better fighter in every appreciable aspect.
There are some interesting matchups in that tournament in terms of because again you're talking historical longevity, things of that nature. So you've got matchups like Thomas Hearns and Lennox Lewis, which I find fascinating to evaluate.
That is a really interesting one, actually.
Yeah, I think that's a terrific one to really look at. And there's a couple others in there that really have some good merit and good discussion based on who you're trying to decide is the better overall fighter. And I think that's a good example of one of the cooler parts of the bracket that I'll actually praise. But you'll have a show where Gavin and I kind of break down our yeses, nos, and what have yous of this tournament and who we each believe should be the guy on top in the end.
Oh, just announced the UFC has confirmed their first bout for UFC 230 in MSG. They finally signed Jacare and Branch. Good for them. Should be a good fight.
Jacare and David Branch in the Garden.
Yep.
I have to imagine that's like 3rd fight down from the top.
Alternatively, main event of the prelims?
I guess, but Jacare's still got some pretty good name value to the point where he's not going to main event that card, but I don't even know that he's necessarily the co-main they want for that arena, you know what I mean?
Probably not. Again, it's their November 3rd card. That's one of their closeout ones for the year. They're going to want a bigger fight. They're going to want 2 bigger fights than that on that card.
Well, isn't the November card always one of the 3 most loaded cards they do in the year?
Usually, and they always try to load MSG just on principle.
It's your November card, your Super Bowl weekend card, and I guess usually on your fight week card. But that kind of
used to be fight week, but that's kind of, that event, that whole week is just cursed at this point. Like they try to set up great fights, and they always fall through.
Yeah, they do.
So anyway, with that out of the way, thank you for listening. You can hear myself and Mark Radulich review The Rock's latest flop, Skyscraper, where we also discuss The Rock's sequence of movies, because he always comes in 3s. There's the smashing success, the moderate success, and the flop. And you have to know where you're going to fall in in the cycle of The Rock when you sign him to do your movie. Because you're going to be one of those 3. And everyone's hoping...
Jump the production of whoever he's working for ahead of you guys. That's literally the way to do it.
Yeah. So you can hear us talk about that. We yell at critics because they're terrible. There is no Damn You Hollywood this Tuesday. I believe instead we have a TV party where Mark and I will review the last 2 seasons of Netflix's Voltron. You know, I got roped into that because I'm a nice guy the first time. Honest to God, true story. Because when Netflix came out with that, people liked it, and they should. It's a well-done television series. So Mark and Robert Cooper were going to review the first season. and Cooper wound up running about 30 to 40 minutes late. And I'd seen everything, so I told Mark, as he's gone live on the air, said, okay, it's just kind of going to be me here. And I said, I've seen it. I can help you fill airtime if you'd like until Cooper shows up. And he said, yes, thank you. Don't let the listenership drop off, because anytime we do solo shows, that tends to happen. And somehow, I have now been roped into every other season that's come out since. This is why you should. This is what happens when you're a decent human being, guys. Or you're me, and a terrible human being that occasionally does decent things. It snowballs. So you can listen to us talk about that. Should be interesting. Mark and I tend to have fun discussions around that show. And then again, we'll be back next week for more MMA action right here. Alright, that's it. That's everything. Thank you, Pat, for being here. It's always a pleasure.
My pleasure.
So on behalf of Pat and Jeff, who is in absentia at the moment, we'll be back next week. Until then, thanks again for listening. Please continue to be well, be safe, and behave.